to increase study of Torah, appreciation of Torah, and to be worthy of more and more revelation of this greatest of divine gifts. It's my pleasure to call upon my colleague, Rabbi Shalom Ber Notik of Chabad.
Thanks, Rabbi Silverberg. So our question for tonight is why? Why write it all down? Why should there be an oral Torah and an oral component separate from the written Torah? If we're writing it, why not write it all? So the question is indeed why, but before we can explain why, we need to talk about the what. What is the oral Torah and where does the oral Torah come from? So contrary to common misconception, the Torah does not begin and end with the 10 commandments God gave us at Mount Sinai. It also does not begin and end with the full Chumash, all the 5 books of Moses, and it does not even begin and end with all of the Tanakh, with all the 24 books that make up the full Bible. Along with the written text of the Torah, God gave Moshe explanation, additional oral information, details, application, background, and much more to get us through the text, the often ambiguous text. Moshe taught this information to the people using a very sophisticated system of teaching this to everyone and ensuring they would retain it. And it was since been transmitted from teacher to student, from generation to generation, all the way till this very day. So the oral Torah begins with what Moshe was taught by God himself orally, in addition to what was written. But the oral Torah transcribed in the Talmud includes additional information, which God did not actually tell Moses. Well, how then can there be more material? Where can additional information come from if God didn't tell it to Moses? Well, the written and the oral tradition include rules for extrapolating the Torah, rules for applying the Torah's guidance and teachings to other situations, to other circumstances that were not specified in the Torah itself. So if a scenario comes up, if a situation develops that the Torah did not address, a student of the Torah has the responsibility to find the clues within the God-given framework, to find a precedent, to find some kind of source material with which to address the new challenge, to address the new scenario or the new circumstance, and often to extrapolate that law for the very first time from the pre-existing material. It's important that we remember that these ideas and these conclusions are not man-made, but are the divine intent all along. The divine intent that now emerged by following the rules and reaching the conclusion embedded within the original idea. This would be very similar to a puzzle, where if I put together the puzzle, or if I solve the riddle, I may be the one doing it, but I am ultimately expressing the original intent of the one creating the puzzle, creating the riddle, putting together the rules of the game. By playing the game according to those rules, I may apply some new creativity. I may have contributed something here, but ultimately I'm expressing the intent of the original author, in the case of the oral Torah, of God himself. And finally, there are additional laws included in the oral Torah which are not part of the transmission God gave orally to Moshe, nor are they extrapolated or derived from them by our analysis. These additional ideas are purely man-made. These are rabbinic laws created by the Torah's responsibility to protect the Torah, to ensure that we safeguard its observance and do it right today and for generations to come. Now, this is not the time to prove the authenticity, to prove how the Torah itself supports the concept of the oral Torah and of all of its components. This is not the time to answer the skeptic who may, for one reason or another, be inclined to accept that the written Torah was given by God, but not the oral transmission. Suffice it to say that within the written text, which somehow is more universally accepted, within the written text, we can find evidence proving the existence of the oral communication of God to Moses, as well as the responsibility to derive further laws, as well as the authority and responsibility of the sages to enact ordinances as needed. So now we know what the oral Torah actually is, but our question still remains, why? why should there be an oral component to the law? Why should there be a part of the law which is not included in the text? If there is a text, which there obviously is, why is the text incomplete? Did God run out of paper, or in this case, parchment? Did God run out of ink? I know that tonight I was given 10 minutes and 10 minutes only. Did they do the same to God? Did God run out of time? If there's more information or more information to develop, why couldn't God include it in the original book? In other words, why didn't God just write it all down? So there's many explanations for this. Or better put, there are many benefits to having the oral system, to having a multifaceted system, which includes this oral component and includes this further analysis and development of the law. Some of these ideas are discussed in various Jewish sources. For example, relying on a book exclusively, relying only on a text, creates unclarity and debate, confusion down the line. Just look at the Constitution in this country, only 240 or so years old, and there's plenty of room for debate already over the original intent. I won't get political about some of those debates and which amendments get more tossed around and which are more generally understood, but within only 2 centuries, we've already got plenty of confusion. What did the author mean? Because in our case, because in the case of the Torah has always been and can only be studied with its oral counterpart, with the oral information packaged along with it, we are ensured of understanding the Torah's intent in previous generations, today, and really forever. Another benefit of a mixed system of part written and part oral is that relying on a book can make students complacent. I know personally, when I was still in yeshiva, when I was in the school, if I would write notes that were too good, they were a problem. They were a liability because they're in the notes. They're not in my brain. If the student is able to rely on the text, the student doesn't feel obliged to really invest and apply him or herself to the study. There's always a text to fall back on. The Torah was designed in such a way where we must, and the Jewish people have, diligently applied themselves to the study to the point where you must really be there and be involved, otherwise it will be forgotten. And of course, a very strong argument can be made that it's not possible to include every future scenario in the original text, and there must be some kind of system to further extrapolate it. And again, there are many more reasons to explain the benefits of an oral tradition and a system which combines both the written and the oral. But really what I find to be the most powerful, what I find to be the most personal and meaningful explanation to the design of the Torah with its oral text and all of its oral tradition and all of its components was taught us by King Solomon, by Shlomo HaMelech in Shir HaShirim in the Song of Songs. Because Shlomo HaMelech says that Shavuos, the holiday of the giving of the Torah, is God's wedding day. Yom Chatunasai, God's wedding day. Now, wedding day, what kind of wedding would that be? What kind of marriage? Is God's giving of the Torah God's marriage with us, with the Jewish people? What would that mean? As far as most of us know, the Mount Sinai was just a fiery display, and God shouting out, "Thou shalt and thou shalt not," and you better toe the line, and the Jewish people just saying, "Yes, sir," and moving on. What kind of marriage, what kind of relationship of equals would that be? I mean, I know there are some people who tend to see relationships in that kind of dominant, one-sided way, but it usually doesn't end very well. What does it mean that the giving of the Torah is our marriage with God? Yom Chatunaso, the holiday we're about to celebrate on Shavuos, is God's marriage with the Jewish people. Well, Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, is actually teaching us something very profound and giving us a deeper appreciation for the Torah as a whole. The giving of the Torah is not just transmission of information, although it's obviously that. The giving of the Torah is divine communication. And communication, by definition, is bridging a gap between the two parties. Before A communicated with B, there was no connection between the two. Once communication has taken place, there now is a connection, there now is a relationship between the two. Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai, is not just God sharing divine data with the world, but communicating with the world, making the world more divine. Before the Torah was given, we were more distant from God. God's presence wasn't found within the world. After the Torah was given, after we have that gift, we were given the possibility to find God and really express God in the world we're in. Really, the giving of the Torah is the beginning of a process, which culminates with the coming of Mashiach. Whereas we study the Torah, when we apply the lessons of the Torah each and every day, each and every year, each and every generation, we make ourselves and the world around us more divine. Now, the problem is, if we were just to hear the info, if we were just to be given the information when the Torah is given at Mount Sinai, and it would all be included in the book, and we would just comply, well, then the gap has not been completely bridged. Then the gap between us and God remains more of a gap than a bridge and a connection. Sure, there's connection now that we've heard God's message and we're doing our best to apply it. But we remain at the bottom of the line, hearing a very removed communication and trying to fulfill it. The way the Torah is in fact designed, not as one book, all inclusive, including all the details and ready to go, but incomplete, requiring us and forcing us to apply our minds, to invest, to both retain the oral tradition, understand it and apply it and transmit it, as well as to discover God's intent in broader circumstances that did not yet arise, as well as to develop those safeguards as needed. The way the Torah is designed, requiring our investment, results in the ultimate partnership, that ultimate relationship, that ultimate marriage between us and God. We weren't just given divine information, we're actually communicating the divine information. When we solve the puzzle, when we search within the Torah and derive a new idea in the Torah, our own mind is actually the one producing the godly idea. Yes, it's the godly message, the author of the puzzle. But as we reach the solution to the riddle that we have come up with, we are now the ones coming up with, revealing the divine message or communicating that with the world. We are not at the end of some long distance telephone call from God and trying to keep up. We're truly partnering with God, becoming a part of investing, of understanding, and even a part of developing and applying the Torah to ourselves and to the world we live in. So, as we celebrate Shavuos, as we celebrate the holiday when the Torah was actually given to us, let's remember the Torah wasn't just given to us. The Torah was given to us as a seed, very much like a gift a young man might be giving his bride at the wedding under the chuppah, as a seed for us to create that life together, to build a better world together, for us to partner with God, to understand the Torah and to apply its message in making the world a better place. So not all of us might be studying the Torah to that degree and discovering its deeper secrets, but each of us can approach this holiday with the mindset and with the understanding of we're here to partner and we're here to contribute. So as we receive the Torah anew this Friday, and really each and every day, we have to ask ourselves, what will I give? What will I invest? What will I contribute? What will I do more to further the mission of the Torah, to make this world a more divine place, to make this world a more messianic place? May it be very soon, and may we all have a wonderful and very happy and healthy, especially Shavuos. And with that, I thank everybody for participating and all the speakers who came before me and really gave me, and I'm sure the same is the case for the rest of us, so much insight and so much to think about over this holiday. Let's make that a wonderful holiday and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Rabbi Neltik. This concludes our program. Thank you, everyone, for joining. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact your local Chabad house. Everyone for taking the time to participate, speakers, and everyone who joined online. Wonderful. Have a wonderful Yom Tov. Chag Sameach.